I never expected my life to change so dramatically on that sweltering summer day in Oceanside. As I stood in my sleek modern office, adjusting the blinds to block out the relentless California sun, I couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. Little did I know that something would come in the form of Sarah Johnson, the woman who was about to become my new assistant, and so much more. I'm Caitlin Moore, a 35-year-old personal stylist who's made quite a name for herself in this coastal town. My clients range from local celebrities to affluent housewives, all desperate for a taste of my signature style. But despite my success, there was always something missing, a void I couldn't quite fill with designer labels and perfectly curated outfits. As I perched on the edge of my desk, smoothing down my pencil skirt, I heard a soft knock on the door. "Come in," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady despite the inexplicable flutter in my stomach. The door swung open, and there she was, Sarah. Time seemed to slow as she walked in, her honey blonde hair catching the sunlight streaming through the windows. She wore a crisp white blouse tucked into high-waisted trousers, a look that was both professional and effortlessly chic. But it wasn't her impeccable style that caught my attention, it was her eyes. A mesmerizing shade of green, they seemed to look right through me, stripping away all my carefully constructed layers. "Ms. Moore?" Her voice was soft but confident. "I'm Sarah Johnson, here for the assistant position interview." I stood up, perhaps a bit too quickly, and extended my hand. "Please, call me Caitlin. It's a pleasure to meet you, Sarah." As our hands touched, I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, and I knew she felt it too. The interview proceeded, but I found myself only half listening to Sarah's impressive qualifications. Instead, I was captivated by the way her lips moved as she spoke, the graceful gestures of her hands as she explained her past experiences. There was an undeniable tension in the air, a charge that made every word, every glance, feel loaded with unspoken meaning. "Your portfolio is impressive," I said, leafing through the sleek black binder she had brought. "Your eye for color coordination and your understanding of current trends are exactly what I'm looking for in an assistant." Sarah beamed, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Thank you, Caitlin. I've admired your work for years. The opportunity to learn from you would be incredible." As we discussed the intricacies of the fashion world, our shared passion became evident. Sarah's eyes lit up as she talked about her favorite designers, and I found myself leaning in, hanging on her every word. It was more than just a professional connection. There was a spark, an undeniable chemistry that both thrilled and terrified me. Before I knew it, an hour had passed, and I was offering Sarah the job on the spot. The look of joy on her face was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile back. As she gathered her things to leave, our hands brushed again, sending another wave of electricity through me. "I look forward to working with you, Caitlin," Sarah said, her voice low and tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. Was it anticipation, desire? "Likewise, Sarah," I replied, suddenly feeling breathless. "I have a feeling this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership." As the door closed behind her, I sank into my chair, my heart racing. What was happening to me? I'd never felt this way about a woman before, let alone someone I'd just met. But there was no denying the attraction, the pull I felt towards Sarah. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. Sarah Johnson was about to turn my world upside down, challenging everything I thought I knew about myself and my desires. As I sat there, lost in thought, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change in ways I never could have imagined. And despite the fear and uncertainty, a part of me couldn't wait to see where this new chapter would lead. The weeks following Sarah's arrival at my company flew by in a whirlwind of fabric swatches, client meetings, and late nights at the office. I found myself constantly aware of her presence, my eyes drawn to her like a magnet whenever she entered a room. Her effortless grace and keen eye for fashion made her an invaluable asset to my team. But it was the moments when our eyes met across a crowded room that truly took my breath away. One particularly hectic evening, As the sun dipped below the oceanside horizon, Sarah and I found ourselves alone in the office, poring over layouts for an upcoming photo shoot. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background, a stark contrast to the electricity crackling between us. "What do you think about this color palette for the beach scenes?" Sarah asked, leaning in close to show me her tablet. Her perfume, a subtle mix of jasmine and vanilla, enveloped me, making it hard to concentrate. "It's perfect," I managed to say, my eyes flicking from the screen to her face. In the soft glow of the desk lamp, her features were softened, almost ethereal. A stray lock of hair had fallen across her cheek, and before I could stop myself, I reached out to tuck it behind her ear. Time seemed to stand still as my fingers brushed against her skin. Sarah's breath caught, her eyes widening slightly as they met mine. For a moment we were frozen, caught in a tableau of unspoken desire. "Caitlin," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The way she said my name sent shivers down my spine. I pulled back abruptly, my heart racing. I'm sorry," I stammered, trying to regain my composure. "It's late. We should probably call it a night." Sarah nodded, a mix of confusion and disappointment flashing across her face. As we packed up our things in silence, I couldn't help but replay the moment in my mind, wondering what might have happened if I hadn't pulled away. The next few days were a delicate dance of stolen glances and careful distance. I found myself making excuses to work late, knowing Sarah would be there, craving her company even as I tried to maintain professional boundaries. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became to ignore the growing attraction between us. It all came to a head during a client fitting. Sarah was helping me adjust a gown on our latest celebrity client when our hands brushed. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through me that was impossible to ignore. I looked up, meeting Sarah's gaze in the mirror, and saw my own longing reflected in her eyes. That night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. Her laugh, her intelligence, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating. I'd never felt this way about a woman before, and it terrified me. What did it mean for my life, my career, my identity? Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Sarah and me continued to build. We worked seamlessly together, our professional rapport growing stronger with each passing day. But beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of something more. A simmering attraction that threatened to boil over at any moment. One evening, as we were wrapping up a particularly grueling day, Sarah turned to me with a hesitant smile. "Caitlin, I was wondering, would you like to grab a drink to celebrate the successful launch of the new collection?" My heart raced at the prospect of spending time with her outside of work. "I'd love to," I heard myself say before I could overthink it. We ended up at a small, dimly lit bar near the office. As we sipped our cocktails, the conversation flowed easily, moving from work to our personal lives. I found myself opening up to Sarah in a way I hadn't with anyone in years. "I've always felt like something was missing," I confessed, the alcohol loosening my tongue. Like there was a part of me I hadn't discovered yet. Sarah's eyes softened as she reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "Maybe you're discovering it now," she said softly. The warmth of her touch spread through me, igniting a fire I'd been trying desperately to suppress. In that moment, surrounded by the low hum of conversation and the soft glow of candlelight, I realized I was falling for Sarah. As we left the bar, the cool night air a stark contrast to the warmth inside, Sarah turned to me. "Caitlin," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, I can't stop thinking about you." My breath caught in my throat as she stepped closer, her eyes searching mine for permission. Slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, she leaned in. When her lips finally met mine, it was like coming home. Soft, tentative at first, then deepening as we both gave in to the desire we'd been fighting for so long. When we finally parted, breathless and flushed, I knew everything had changed. There was no going back now, no pretending this was just a professional relationship. As I watched Sarah hail a cab, her lips still swollen from our kiss, I felt a mix of exhilaration and terror. What would this mean for us, for our working relationship, and more importantly, what did it mean for me, a woman who had never considered herself anything but straight? As I made my way home, my mind raced with possibilities and fears. One thing was certain, my life would never be the same again. The weeks following that fateful kiss were a whirlwind of stolen moments and hidden glances. Sarah and I tried to maintain a facade of professionalism at work, but the air between us crackled with unspoken desire. Every accidental brush of hands, every shared smile across a crowded room, felt charged with possibility. It was in this state of exhilarating tension that we embarked on a work trip to New York Fashion Week. As we boarded the plane, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. A week away from the office, away from prying eyes. What would it mean for us? The universe, it seemed, had plans of its own. Upon arriving at our hotel, we were met with an apologetic concierge. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Moore, but there's been a booking error. We only have one room available." I felt Sarah stiffen beside me, her eyes widening slightly. My heart raced as I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. That's fine. We'll make do." As we entered the room, the sight of the single king-sized bed sent a jolt through me. Sarah set down her bag, her movements deliberate and measured. "I can sleep on the couch if you prefer," she offered, her voice soft. "Don't be silly," I heard myself say, even as my pulse quickened. "The bed's plenty big enough for both of us." That night, as we lay side by side, the inches between us felt like miles. I was acutely aware of Sarah's presence, the soft sound of her breathing, the faint scent of her shampoo. Sleep eluded me as my mind raced with thoughts of what could be. The days that followed were a blur of runway shows, networking events, and stolen moments of intimacy. In the privacy of our shared room, we allowed ourselves to explore the connection that had been building between us for months. It was on our third night in New York that everything changed. We'd returned to our room after a particularly glamorous after-party, both of us buzzing with the excitement of the evening. As I slipped off my heels, I caught Sarah watching me, her gaze intense and filled with longing. "Caitlin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can't keep pretending." I crossed the room to her, my heart pounding. "Then don't," I replied, cupping her face in my hands. Our lips met in a kiss that was different from our first, where that had been tentative and exploratory. This was passionate and urgent. Years of repressed desire and confusion melted away as I lost myself in Sarah's embrace. As we fell onto the bed, hands roaming and breath mingling, I marveled at how right it felt. Every touch, every kiss, every soft moan was a revelation. Sarah's fingers trailed fire across my skin as she slowly unbuttoned my blouse, her eyes never leaving mine. "Is this okay?" she murmured, her hand hovering at the clasp of my bra. "More than okay," I breathed, arching into her touch. What followed was a night of passion and discovery. Sarah's touch was gentle yet confident, guiding me through sensations I'd never experienced before. As we explored each other's bodies, I felt as though I was finally awakening to a part of myself that had been dormant for so long. In the afterglow, as we lay tangled in the sheets, Sarah traced lazy patterns on my skin. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of hope and uncertainty. I pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know I don't want it to end." The rest of the trip passed in a haze of stolen kisses and secret touches. By day, we were consummate professionals, networking and securing new clients. But in the privacy of our room, we were free to explore our budding relationship. As our flight back to Oceanside approached, a sense of unease settled over me. What would happen when we returned to the real world? Could we keep our relationship a secret from our colleagues and clients? On our last night in New York, as we packed our bags, Sarah broached the subject. "Caitlin," she began, her voice hesitant. "When we get back, what happens then?" I paused, a dress halfway folded in my hands. I'm not sure," I replied honestly. "This is all so new to me. I've never felt this way about a woman before." Sarah crossed the room, taking my hands in hers. "We don't have to figure it all out right now," she said softly. But I want you to know, whatever happens, I'm here. We can take this as slow as you need. Relief washed over me at her words. Thank you, I whispered, leaning in to kiss her gently. I do know one thing, I want to see where this goes. But maybe we can keep it between us for now, just until I figure things out. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course, our secret. As we boarded the plane the next morning, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation about what lay ahead. We were embarking on uncharted territory, and while it terrified me, it also thrilled me to my core. Settling into my seat, Sarah's hand found mine, giving it a gentle squeeze. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges we might face, we would face them together. As the plane took off, carrying us back to Oceanside and the realities of our lives, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to dream of the possibilities that lay ahead. The weeks following our return from New York wore a delicate balance of stolen moments and careful discretion. Sarah and I fell into a rhythm, our days filled with client meetings and fashion consultations, our nights spent exploring this new, thrilling connection between us. Every shared glance across the office held a secret, every accidental brush of hands a promise of what was to come. But as with all secrets, the weight of ours began to press down on us. The constant vigilance, the fear of being discovered, started to take its toll. I found myself jumping at every unexpected noise, paranoid that someone might walk in on us during one of our late-night strategy sessions that had become thinly veiled excuses to be alone together. It was during one such evening, as Sarah's lips traced a path along my collarbone and my fingers tangled in her hair, that my phone buzzed insistently on the desk. Reluctantly, I pulled away to check it, my heart stopping as I saw the name on the screen. Melanie. Who is it? Sarah asked, noticing the change in my demeanor. I swallowed hard, guilt washing over me. It's Melanie, my ex. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something, hurt, jealousy, passing across her face. Oh, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Are you going to answer it? I stared at the phone, memories flooding back. Melanie and I had been together for 3 years before she'd left for a job across the country. The breakup had been amicable, but the wound had never fully healed. And now here she was, calling out of the blue. I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. It might be important. Sarah nodded, pulling away and busying herself with some papers on the desk. I could feel the tension radiating off her as I answered the call. Melanie, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's been a while. Caitlin. Melanie's familiar voice came through the speaker, sending a jolt through me. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I'm back in town. I was hoping we could meet up, catch up on old times. I glanced at Sarah, who was pointedly not looking in my direction. Sure, that would be nice, I heard myself say, even as I saw Sarah's shoulders tense. When were you thinking? We made plans to meet for coffee the following afternoon, and as I hung up, the silence in the office was deafening. Sarah finally turned to me, her expression unreadable. So you're meeting up with your ex, she said, her tone carefully neutral. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. It's just coffee, Sarah. We have history, but that's all it is, history. Sarah nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Right. Of course, I should probably head home, it's getting late. As I watched her gather her things and leave, a sense of unease settled over me. What was I doing? Was I jeopardizing this new, beautiful thing with Sarah for the ghost of a relationship past? The next day, as I sat across from Melanie in a bustling Oceanside cafe, those questions continued to swirl in my mind. Melanie looked good, the years had been kind to her, and seeing her brought back a flood of memories. I've missed you, Caitlin, Melanie said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Being away, it made me realize what I left behind. I felt a flutter in my stomach, but it was tinged with guilt. Melanie, I know, she interrupted, a sad smile on her face. I'm not expecting anything. I wanted you to know that I still care about you, that I never stopped caring. As we continued to talk, catching up on the years we'd spent apart, I found myself torn. There was a comfort in Melanie's presence, a familiarity that was both soothing and dangerous. But every time I laughed at one of her jokes or felt that old connection spark, Sarah's face flashed in my mind. When I returned to the office that evening, Sarah was still there, working late. The tension between us was palpable as I walked in. "How was your coffee date?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "It wasn't a date," I said quickly. "We just caught up." "It was nice." Sarah nodded, turning back to her computer. "I'm sure it was." I wanted to go to her, to reassure her that she was the one I wanted, but something held me back. The guilt of my lingering feelings for Melanie, the fear of fully committing to this new, unknown path with Sarah, it all swirled together, leaving me paralyzed. The next few weeks were a dance of conflicting emotions. Melanie's presence in town stirred up old feelings, while my growing connection with Sarah deepened. I found myself pulled in two directions, the stability and familiarity of my past with Melanie warring with the exciting if uncertain future with Sarah. Sarah, for her part, tried to hide her jealousy, but I could see it in the tightness around her eyes when Melanie's name came up, in the way she'd pull away when I touched her. Our secret rendezvous became less frequent, the easy intimacy we'd shared giving way to an undercurrent of tension. One night, as we worked late again, the dam finally broke. "Do you still have feelings for her?" Sarah asked abruptly, her voice breaking the silence. I looked up, startled by the directness of her question. It's complicated," I admitted. "Melanie and I have history. But Sarah, what I feel for you, is it enough?" She interrupted, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Because I can't do this halfway, Caitlin. I can't be your secret while you figure out if you want to go back to your ex." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I realized then how unfair I'd been, trying to have it both ways. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "I know, but you need to figure out what you want, Caitlin. Who you want. Because I can't keep living in limbo." As I watched her leave the office, my heart heavy with the weight of the decision before me, I knew I had reached a crossroads. The time had come to confront my feelings, to decide which path I wanted to take, the comfort and familiarity of the past with Melanie, or the thrilling if uncertain future with Sarah. Little did I know, fate was about to throw another curveball my way, one that would force me to confront not just my feelings but the very foundation of who I thought I was. The morning after my confrontation with Sarah, I woke to a world that felt off-kilter. The California sun streamed through my bedroom window, but its warmth failed to penetrate the chill that had settled in my chest. As I reached for my phone, a habit born of years in the fast-paced fashion industry, I was met with a barrage of missed calls and messages. My heart sank as I saw my mother's name repeated over and over. With trembling fingers I dialed her number, a sense of foreboding washing over me. Her voice, when she answered, was thick with tears. "Caitlin, it's your sister. There's been an accident." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as my mother's words washed over me. My sister, my vibrant, vivacious little sister, gone in the blink of an eye. A drunk driver, a slick road, a moment of tragedy that would forever alter the landscape of our family. I moved through the next few hours in a daze, packing a bag, booking a flight, all while feeling as though I was watching someone else go through the motions. It wasn't until I was seated on the plane, staring out at the endless expanse of sky, that the reality of the situation truly hit me. Tears began to fall, silent and unstoppable, as I mourned not just for my sister but for all the moments we'd never share. In my grief-stricken state, I found myself reaching for my phone, my finger hovering over Sarah's name in my contacts. Despite our recent tension, she was the one I longed to talk to, the one whose comfort I craved. But before I could press dial, a text from Melanie lit up my screen. "I heard about your sister. I'm so sorry, Caitlin. I'm here if you need anything." The dueling messages seemed to perfectly encapsulate the turmoil in my heart. Sarah, my present, my exciting and terrifying future. Melanie, my past, comfortable and known. And now, in the face of this tragedy, I felt more lost than ever. The days that followed passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, consoling relatives, and moments of gut-wrenching grief. Through it all, Sarah's absence was a palpable ache. She had sent a beautiful bouquet of flowers and a heartfelt message, but maintained a respectful distance, understanding my need for space and family. Melanie, on the other hand, was a constant presence. She showed up at my parents' house with casseroles and offers of help, slipping easily into the role of the supportive ex-girlfriend. Her familiarity with my family, her understanding of our dynamics, was both a comfort and a source of confusion. It was on the night after the funeral, as I sat alone on my childhood porch swing, that I heard the soft crunch of gravel. Looking up, I saw Sarah standing at the bottom of the steps, uncertainty written across her face. "I hope it's okay that I'm here," she said softly. I couldn't stay away any longer. I needed to see you, to make sure you were okay." In that moment, seeing Sarah standing there, all the complications of our relationship fell away. I stood on shaky legs and practically fell into her arms, finally allowing myself to break down completely. She held me as I sobbed, her fingers gently combing through my hair, murmuring words of comfort. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner," she whispered. "I wanted to give you space, but God, Caitlin, it was killing me to be away from you." I pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. "You're here now," I said, my voice hoarse from crying. "That's what matters." As we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, I heard the screen door open behind us. Turning, I saw Melanie standing there, a look of surprise and hurt flashing across her face before she could mask it. "Oh," she said, her voice tight. "I didn't realize you had company, Caitlin. I'll come back later." Before I could say anything, she had retreated back into the house. I felt Sarah stiffen in my arms, the weight of our complicated situation crashing back down around us. "I should go," Sarah said, pulling away slightly. "You clearly have a lot to deal with right now." I tightened my grip on her hand, suddenly terrified of letting her leave. "No, please, stay. I need you here." The next few days were a delicate balancing act. Sarah stayed in town, a quiet but steady presence at my side. Melanie, to her credit, gave us space, though I could see the questions in her eyes whenever we were in the same room. As the fog of immediate grief began to lift, I found myself faced with the decision I'd been avoiding. The loss of my sister had put everything into sharp perspective. Life was too short, too precious, to waste on indecision and fear. One evening, as Sarah and I sat on that same porch swing, her hand entwined with mine, I turned to her. "I'm sorry," I said softly, "for everything, for making you doubt, for not being brave enough to choose you outright." Sarah squeezed my hand. "Caitlin, you don't have to." "No, I do," I interrupted. "Losing my sister, it's made me realize how fragile life is, how important it is to grab onto happiness when you find it." I took a deep breath. "And you, Sarah? You make me happy, in a way I've never experienced before. If you can forgive me, if you're willing to give us a real shot, I want to be with you. Openly, honestly, completely." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she leaned in, pressing her forehead against mine. "There's nothing to forgive," she whispered. "I love you, Caitlin. All of you, complications and all." As we sealed our new beginning with a kiss, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There was still Melanie to talk to, my family to tell, a whole world to face. But for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Hope for a future filled with love, with Sarah by my side. Little did I know, the challenges we'd face would test the very foundations of our newfound commitment. But in that moment, on that porch swing, with the memory of my sister in my heart and Sarah's hand in mine, I was ready to face whatever came our way. The morning of my sister's funeral dawned with a somber gray sky, as if nature itself was mourning her loss. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my black dress, when I heard a soft knock at the door. Sarah peeked in, her eyes full of concern. "Are you ready?" she asked gently, crossing the room to stand behind me. I met her gaze in the mirror, drawing strength from her presence. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. As we made our way to the church, Sarah's hand firmly clasped in mine, I couldn't help but feel a mix of gratitude and guilt. Grateful for her unwavering support, yet guilty for the complications our relationship had brought into this already difficult time. The service was a blur of tears, hugs, and whispered condolences. I barely registered the words of the priest or the eulogies given by friends and family. It wasn't until I felt a familiar hand on my shoulder that I snapped back to reality. Melanie stood beside me, her eyes red-rimmed but filled with compassion. "I'm so sorry, Caitlin," she murmured, pulling me into a tight embrace. As I returned her hug, I caught sight of Sarah over Melanie's shoulder. The look on her face, a mixture of hurt, jealousy, and resignation, made my heart clench. In that moment, I realized that the time for indecision had passed. I needed to confront my feelings head-on, for everyone's sake. After the service, as friends and family gathered at my parents' house, I found myself cornered by both Sarah and Melanie in the kitchen. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. "I think we need to talk," Melanie said, her voice low and serious. "All of us," Sarah nodded, her jaw set in determination. "I agree, this situation, it can't continue like this." I looked between the two women who had come to mean so much to me, each in their own way. Melanie, with our shared history and comfortable familiarity. Sarah, with the excitement of new love and the promise of a future I'd never dared to imagine. "You're right," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's go somewhere more private." We made our way to my old bedroom, the same room where Melanie and I had shared our first kiss years ago, and where just days earlier, I had broken down in Sarah's arms. The irony wasn't lost on me as we settled in, Melanie perched on the edge of the bed, Sarah leaning against the desk, and me standing awkwardly between them. "I know this isn't the best time," Melanie began, her voice soft but firm. "But Caitlin, I need to know where we stand. Coming back here, being with you and your family again, it's made me realize how much I've missed you, how much I still care for you." I saw Sarah flinch out of the corner of my eye, but she remained silent, waiting for my response. "Melanie," I started, my voice trembling slightly. "What we had was beautiful, and I'll always cherish those memories, but you're with Sarah now," Melanie finished for me, a sad smile playing on her lips. I nodded, turning to face Sarah. "Yes, Sarah, I'm sorry for any doubt or pain I've caused you. The truth is, I love you. What we have, it's new and scary and exciting, but it's also real and deep and something I want to explore fully." Sarah's eyes welled with tears, a mix of relief and joy washing over her face. She crossed the room, taking my hands in hers. "I love you too, Caitlin. All I've wanted is for you to choose, to be sure." Melanie stood, her movement drawing our attention. "I guess that's my cue to bow out gracefully," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I hope you'll both be very happy together." As she moved to leave, I reached out, catching her arm. "Melanie, wait. You've been such an important part of my life, of my family's life. I hope we can still be friends." Melanie paused, looking between Sarah and me. After a moment, she nodded. "It might take some time, but I'd like that." As Melanie left the room, closing the door softly behind her, I turned back to Sarah. The air between us felt charged, filled with possibility and the promise of a new beginning. "So," Sarah said, a small smile playing on her lips, "where do we go from here?" I pulled her close, resting my forehead against hers. "Forward," I whispered, "together." Our lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home and embarking on a new adventure all at once. As we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. We still had to face my family, our colleagues, the world at large. But in that moment, I knew we could handle anything as long as we were together. Later that evening, as the last of the funeral guests were leaving, I gathered my courage and approached my parents. Hand in hand with Sarah, we told them about our relationship. Their initial shock gave way to confusion, then a cautious acceptance tinged with concern. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart?" my mother asked, her brow furrowed. "It's such a big change, and with everything that's happened, I squeezed Sarah's hand, drawing strength from her presence. I'm sure, Mom. Sarah, she makes me happy. Happier than I've ever been. My father, always the more taciturn of the two, simply nodded. As long as you're happy, that's what matters, he said gruffly, pulling me into a tight hug. As we drove back to my apartment that night, the weight of the day's events settling over us, Sarah turned to me. Are you okay? She asked softly. With everything that happened today? I took a moment to really consider her question. The grief of losing my sister still sat heavy in my chest, a pain I knew would take a long time to heal. But alongside it, there was a warmth, a sense of rightness that came from finally being honest about my feelings, about who I was. I'm okay, I replied, reaching over to take her hand. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. As we pulled up to my building, I knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. We'd have to face our colleagues, figure out how to navigate our professional relationship alongside our personal one. But for tonight, as Sarah and I made our way up to my apartment, I allowed myself to focus on the present. On the feel of her hand in mine, the promise of a future together, and the knowledge that whatever came next, we'd face it side by side. The California sun streamed through the windows of our shared office, casting a warm glow over the space Sarah and I had come to call our second home. It had been 6 months since we'd decided to go public with our relationship, and while the journey hadn't been easy, it had been undeniably worth it. I watched Sarah from across the room, admiring the way she effortlessly styled a mannequin for our latest client presentation. Her brow furrowed in concentration, a stray lock of hair falling across her face. Without thinking, I crossed the room and gently tucked it behind her ear. Sarah looked up, a soft smile playing on her lips. What was that for? Just because, I replied, leaning in to steal a quick kiss. The sound of someone clearing their throat behind us made us jump apart. Our newest intern, a bright-eyed college student named Alex, stood in the doorway, a stack of fabric swatches in hand. Sorry to interrupt, they said, a slight blush coloring their cheeks. But the Hendersons are here for their consultation. As Alex scurried away, Sarah and I exchanged a look, both of us fighting back laughter. It was moments like these, the casual intimacy, the shared secret smiles, that made all the challenges we'd faced worth it. The past few months hadn't been without their hurdles. When we'd first announced our relationship to our colleagues, there had been a mix of reactions. Some were supportive, others skeptical, and a few were downright hostile. We'd lost a couple of clients who weren't comfortable with the idea of their stylists being in a same-sex relationship, but for every setback, there had been triumphs. Our honesty had inspired loyalty in many of our long-term clients, and we'd even attracted new ones who appreciated our authenticity. More importantly, being open about our relationship had allowed us to fully be ourselves, both at work and in our personal lives. As we made our way to the consultation room, Sarah squeezed my hand. Ready to wow them, partner? I grinned, feeling a rush of affection for this incredible woman who had turned my world upside down in the best possible way. Always. The meeting with the Hendersons went smoothly, our natural chemistry and complementary styles working in perfect harmony. As we wrapped up, Mrs. Henderson pulled me aside. You know, she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, when I first heard about you and Sarah, I wasn't sure what to think. But seeing you two together, it's clear you bring out the best in each other. In work and in life, I'd wager. Her words stayed with me for the rest of the day, a warm glow in my chest. As Sarah and I closed up the office that evening, I found myself reflecting on how far we'd come. What's on your mind? Sarah asked as we walked hand in hand to our favorite little bistro for dinner. I paused, turning to face her under the soft glow of a streetlight. I was just thinking about everything we've been through, the good, the bad, all of it. And you know what? What? She asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. I wouldn't change a thing, I said, pulling her close, because it all led me to you. Sarah's eyes welled with tears as she leaned in, pressing her forehead against mine. I love you, Caitlin, more than I ever thought possible. As we shared a tender kiss, oblivious to the world around us, I felt a sense of completeness I'd never experienced before. This was where I belonged, who I was meant to be. Later that night, as we lay tangled in the sheets of our bed, Sarah propped herself up on an elbow, her expression serious. "I've been thinking," she began, tracing patterns on my skin. "What if we expanded the business, opened a boutique that caters specifically to LGBTQ clients? A place where everyone can feel comfortable and celebrated?" I felt a thrill of excitement at the idea. "That sounds amazing, but it would be a big undertaking." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "It would. But think of the impact we could have, the lives we could touch." As we spent the next few hours brainstorming ideas, I marveled at how perfectly we complemented each other. Where I was cautious, Sarah was bold. Where she was impulsive, I was methodical. Together, we were unstoppable. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity as we put our plan into motion. We faced skepticism from some investors, but our passion and vision eventually won them over. With each step forward, our dream began to take shape. On the day of our boutique's grand opening, I stood at the entrance, hand in hand with Sarah, watching as a diverse crowd of clients, friends, and supporters gathered. My parents were there, beaming with pride. Even Melanie had come, true to her word about remaining friends. As we cut the ribbon and officially opened True Colors Boutique, I felt a surge of emotion. This wasn't just a business venture, it was a statement, a declaration that love, in all its forms, was beautiful and worthy of celebration. Later that evening, as the last of our guests trickled out, Sarah and I found ourselves alone in the shop. The space hummed with potential, racks of carefully curated clothing and accessories lining the walls. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. "Can you believe it?" I pulled her close, breathing in the scent that had become home to me. "With you by my side, I can believe anything." As we stood there surrounded by the fruits of our labor and love, I realized that this moment, this woman, this life we were building together, was everything I had ever wanted, even when I didn't know I wanted it. The journey had been filled with unexpected turns, moments of doubt, and challenges that had tested us both. But standing here now, I knew with absolute certainty that every step had been worth it, because it had led me to Sarah, to self-discovery, and to a love that was as beautiful as it was transformative. As we locked up the boutique and stepped out into the warm oceanside night, hand in hand, I felt a sense of excitement for what the future held. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever joys and sorrows we might face, I knew we would face them together. And really, that was all that mattered.